Yeah. Yeah. We'll change the name of this to How to Beat Your Annual Compliance Training. That would be
Right. My HR
uh,
department's going to love this conversation.
This is L&D Unlocked, a series for L&D and HR professionals looking to unlock the future of learning and development. Presented by BizLibrary, L&D Unlocked is an ongoing series where we speak to industry experts and thought leaders about the future of work, workplace trends, and how your organization can prepare today for the challenges of tomorrow. Learn more at bizlibrary.com.
Hello, welcome to another edition of L&D Unlocked. I'm your host and Chief Marketing Officer at BizLibrary, Paul Eschen. L&D Unlocked is the one and only series for L&D and HR professionals who are really looking to unlock the future of L&D. Our goal, as always, is to find the keys to unlocking impactful L&D programs. You can find and subscribe to this series on our YouTube channel at BizLibrary or on our website at bizlibrary.com. I am so excited, and I know I say this a lot, to introduce this week's guest, Brent Clark. Brent has a vast array of experience in all things L&D and HR, from running IT and technical training now for a global cloud and AI tech firm, to years ago running people and operations for a startup that he was able to scale from just a handful of employees to over 100. Brent, you have such a really cool mix of training and HR experience, which I think is such an interesting inflection point right now, both for this conversation, for this YouTube series, and just broader conversations and challenges going on in kind of corporate America. So with that, I welcome you formally to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Really a pleasure to be here and looking forward to what should be a pretty fun conversation today. So thanks for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's dive right in. So, I kind of introed a little bit of your experience, but you really have done, all the things in this space, I feel like, over your career. Tell me about what you're currently doing, and as well as kind of like your background at a high level as it relates to training and development in HR.
Absolutely. I actually want to start at the beginning because I think so many people in L&D are in a similar situation that I'm in, and that we got into it by default. Like, we never grew up thinking, I want to be a trainer when I grow up. I want to get into L&D. And, I worked in financial services for 15 of my 20 years. And I've made it through the 2008 recession that we went through, that terrible financial time. And coming out of it, I said, I don't want to work in sales anymore in financial services. This was awful. I should go be a trainer. And that's how I got into it. But my long-term goal was always management, whatever the organization was going to be. And that just catapulted from training to training management to leading a training organization to helping scale out a startup, as you mentioned, to where I'm at now, which is Senior Director of Training and Documentation at Genesis Cloud, telecommunications and contact center, customer contact center solutions, SaaS provider. So it's been kind of a wild ride, but I don't think it's that different than so many people that have ended up in this space.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned you're kind of in financial services and then decided to go into training. What was that initial gig for you that the opportunity was there? I mean, I think about like part of it is just a love for working with people. But yeah, tell me about that first job opportunity and how it came to be.
I know we're going to get into technology later and some of the trends in tech, but that was when you put 30 people in a classroom and you got in front of them and you spoke to them for 4 straight days, right? And let me teach you everything that you need to know about this subject. So when I became a trainer, my background financial services, but I focused on consumer lending. So mortgages, home equities, auto loans, personal loans, credit cards, et cetera. I taught a 4-day class, 8:30 in the morning till 5 p.m. to 30 people, where you had to be like on, right? You couldn't just step to the side and let them do some self-paced work. E-learning was just really starting to take off. And so it was get up there and be a teacher, right? And that's
Yeah.
what kind of drew me to it, because I love being in front of people. Obviously, that world has changed quite a bit. There's still a huge demand for instructor-led training, but now it's partnered with the technology that's out there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, we've done a number of these now with a lot of people who are coming into L&D. Like, it's interesting you say not only is their feedback similar, like you kind of fall into L&D
Yep.
from other careers that make natural sense, but a lot of people moving from education, truly high school, social studies teacher into L&D, and just the natural. I actually talked to a woman who said, she went to get her master's in all things instructional design and was basically like, oh my gosh, like these are the basic principles of what I've been doing teaching for the last 20 years. It's not that different.
Right. Well, and depending on your audience, right? Whatever level you're teaching, sometimes those kids don't want to be there. They don't want to be in the biology class because they're never going to do anything in biology. Yet, if this is your career, and let's go with financial services, right where it was, you made a decision to be a banker. You made a decision to be a lender. So now you're curious about the subject that's in front of you. And curiosity is the recipe for success with L&D from your participants. If you've got that captive audience, you're going to enjoy it way more than just teaching to a group that's kind of being forced to be there.
Yeah. I mean, a biology course for a high schooler is essentially insert annual compliance in any organization any of us work for.
Right, right. And there's a need for it. There's a lot of things we learn from it, but people don't always see the value in the moment, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, at the heart of it, it's distilling something complex, or I just love even people may not want to be there, which is such a common challenge. The number one challenge we see every year in this survey we do is getting people to take the training. Super basic and super important to the job, but an ongoing challenge that nobody, I feel like, has kind of the secret code to crack.
Well, and that's where technology has helped us, but also hurt us, right? When it was truly instructor-led training for so much of what we did 15, 20 years ago, it was put on your calendar and you were put into a conference room, right? You weren't on your cell phone, you weren't multitasking, you weren't on Slack talking to somebody while trying to do your annual compliance training, while distributing it, giving people quizzes and tests has become a lot easier. It's also become a lot easier to, I have to take this, but I can just hit play and go do the rest of my job. It's actually kind of hurt us a little bit too.
Yeah. It's interesting. BizLibrary has been around 27 years now, and many people don't know this. We were basically Netflix before Netflix was. So exactly what you're describing, we would ship out compliance training videos on DVD to these locations, and people, like you said, have to sit in a room. Hey, I'm checking that you're here. You signed your name. And now I feel like there's a million ways to skirt the system on, I hit play and I left the room and I went and folded laundry, did something else. And it's a real challenge.
Yeah, well, what I've seen in so much compliance training is they use timers on their phone, right? Okay, this video is 16 minutes and 43 seconds. At 16 minutes, my phone will go off and I'll come back and hit the next button. I shouldn't be advertising this because I don't want people to know these loopholes, but technology needs to solve that somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll change the name of this to How to Beat Your Annual Compliance Training. That would be
right. My HR department's going to love this conversation.
Well, I know it's speaking on that. I don't know if you've got kind of an answer to it, but what are some things people could do to kind of avoid that challenge, or is it just one of those? It's the nature of the beast. I mean, I think about things like surveys that are required, certain score requirements, but I'm just curious if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day as you sent some questions to prepare for this. And I don't know that the solution is there today, but I thought about what I do when I'm in a session as a learner in the classroom. And frankly, I doodle, right? And I actually went to a leadership training a couple years ago, and I got out my iPad and they're like, hey, we're going to keep devices away. And I said, no, I'm taking notes on OneNote here. And I had the pen, and she came by and she said, you're not taking notes, you're drawing. And I was like, that's how I pay attention. And I have not thought about inventing a technology around this, but I think it'd be really cool is as you're going through some sort of online training, whether it's on your phone, if there was interaction with you, that wasn't just click here, type a word, hit the next button. If there was truly a creative aspect that could be partnered with that training, man, I think that would get people to stay engaged a little bit longer. I don't know how to solve that one yet, but that'd be pretty neat.
I think you're onto something. I mean, what we've found, we've started doing compliance training with experts that are not, super outdated, people who have kind of, we all think of the old outdated training where you sit there for 45 minutes and it's very monotone. We brought in experts in the space who, lead companies around this, and it's a lot more engaging in that way. But then also, you make me think of like scenario based, like, or practicing, like actually putting people in real life situations that they might actually deal with and having them record how they'd respond to something or write how they, something that shows mastery or proficiency in it, but also makes it feel like something that impacts their everyday job? Like, how do you make it actually personal to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah. So, tell me more about what your current focus is. I know you kind of manage technical training for IT programmers, a really large team there. What does that day to day look like?
Yeah, so the product that we sell, our customers sometimes have problems with, right? They've configured something incorrectly. There might have been a bug, and so they call in and they need help from engineers to help them troubleshoot the system that's in front of them. And so, there's two parts of that. There's onboarding new engineers and teaching them our system, but then there's also the upskilling, right? Our product is changing every single day. Every week, we're putting out new releases. How do you educate your existing workforce, not even your new hires, to make sure that the changes that are coming, again, very fast, that they know what those are so that they can be successful in helping customers when they call in. So, our day to day right now, and I've been in the role just a little over a year at this point, is figuring out how we take all of these changes and all this content that exists out there and how to support our product and make it digestible for an employee to not only consume it, but want to consume it, right? This is going to impact my job. If you go look at release notes for any SaaS company, by the way, the page is a mile long. They're never going to read all of that and understand everything that's in there. So how do you break that down into something that's going to be manageable for them? And that's what we're trying to solve at Genesis right now.
Interesting. Yeah, that being a SaaS company, that I literally had a conversation on this exact topic this morning. So I think that's fascinating. And you're right. Any SaaS solution, and just like any other company, whatever product you sell, so complex and always evolving.
Yeah.
And so being able to create, it sounds like, a sustainable model that actually keeps people upskilled ongoing is a challenge. So what's kind of the hardest challenge that you've seen in this role?
Well, this is where I love that my worlds collide. I have training, the learning and development, but I also have content management. So job aids, help websites, things
Yeah.
like that. And for me, successful L&D organizations have an ecosystem. It's not just, okay, HR handles annual compliance training, and then we handle technical training, and there's another group that writes policy and another group that writes how the product works. It's actually when you have all of that working together, and your training references your content and your content makes updates that they get to your training team, that's how you're going to solve that. And that's that ecosystem. It is near impossible right now. Our biggest obstacle is staying up to date with the changes. Again, if you look at release notes for some organizations, for any SaaS company, some of them are doing them weekly, some of them are doing releases monthly. Sometimes there are 2,000, 3,000 changes that are being pushed. One, that's not consumable for anybody. Many of them are not big changes, they're bug fixes. But also, how do you keep your training up to date? Right. And so you think back to the beginning of my career when I walked into that classroom, I had a binder that was this thick, and we'd go page by page through that thing. And we had scenarios and we do group activities. I can't update a binder with 2,000 changes happening every single week. Right. So you have to build your training to be impactful enough, but generic enough that they go use the resources that are existing to go solve cases, to go develop their skill set, to go learn more, versus trying to give them everything they need in one training session. You just won't be successful that way.
Yeah, you make me think of, how we work with our product team today, even in marketing, which is, you mentioned, it's a laundry list of updates to the product. What actually matters here and what's the gist of it? Like, what will a customer care about, right? Versus what you need to care about when you're in product. Um, so speak more to that, specifically on kind of how you work with your subject matter experts on the product side. Um, and what have you really learned, second follow up, in your history? I know you've worked with a lot of subject matter experts over your career. What have you learned from that? What are common mistakes that trainers and instructional designers tend to make in that world, and what are some things that they could learn as well?
Yeah, I think that's different for each organization. And I think it's a struggle industry wide in the SaaS space. Where you're going to be most successful, and what we're trying to do is be less dependent upon product to tell us everything we need, but actually we embed ourselves in the process. So we have weekly release note meetings. my team attends those, right? We don't wait for the summary after the fact to tell us what we need to update in our training. We actually go to those meetings. We ask questions during those meetings. Hey, how's this going to impact X, Y, and Z? It also helps that my trainers came from a technical background, and when they read the release notes, they can understand it. Um, that benefits us, but it's that proactive approach of embedding yourself with the product team that's going to make those changes consumable, something that you can consume as a trainer, but then also turn around and update your material and relate to your end users. So that's what we've tried to do. We're not 100% successful with it yet, but it's a journey we're on right now.
Hey, that makes me think, overall, when you think about SME engagement in kind of any role you've had over your career, um, any kind of best practices there? I mean, over communication, absolutely, but is it really a matter of kind of building relationships? And I would assume some organizations, they end up having their SME actually deliver the trainings, and
Yeah.
they don't know about it, so they kind of leave it like, well, I checked the box if you trained a bunch of people, and I hope they learned it, kind of thing. What have you found works well in those environments?
Yeah. The one thing I've learned is SMEs aren't necessarily the best trainers. So if you are depending upon your SME to deliver the training and it's not their skill set, they are not going to be focusing on necessarily comprehension and retention. So you do need to look at SME training and what they're communicating to you from the lens of true curriculum development, right? And what is best for your learner. So that is, I think, lesson number one. Lesson number two is training and documentation and content, right? They actually need to be part of the release process, meaning there is a check on the release notes that say we have engaged the training team. They need 3 weeks to build this before we can release this versus releasing it and then hoping the training team picks it up. So the earlier in the process you are actually part of that approval, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Versus, hey, we got to launch this product. It's out there. We've told our customers, but the internal team doesn't know about it. Like you said, you're embedded into the process so that you do things in the right order versus always, which I think is a common challenge of L&D people, right? It's like have to be so reactive because we're
Oh
finding
yeah.
out everything last.
Oh, and that's every organization, right?
Yeah.
There was an emergency fix put in, and we forgot to communicate it. We had to do this. Now your customers are calling, and I mean, think about that from a customer experience, but also think about that from an employee experience. Like, how awful would it be to answer the phone and a customer knows more than you because something changed in the product that you weren't communicated to? Like, that's got to be a frustrating employee experience.
Which honestly, the world you live in is got to be an evolving level of importance in every organization because what we know about specifically in B2B buyers, right? You and I, and also I'd say B2C buyers, we are literally doing all of our research before we ever engage the organization. So it is more and more common that your customer knows more about you than your product if they're super engaged and they're a real advocate and a big fan. And if your people don't know those answers, I mean, I think you get a little bit of grace, but that's going to be more and more frustrating from a customer lens. And also, you're leaving potential business upsells and happy customers and all these kind of NPS scores, just all the things that come from you being able to educate your customer drop off when you don't have that alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And people don't share as much of the positive experience as they should, but everybody likes to share the negative experience. I'm that way as a consumer, by the way. I don't always leave a glowing review for every organization I interact with, but when I'm upset,
Yep.
they hear about it. And that's part of a culture that we've built, as a society. And I don't know how we completely solve that. But arming your people with the tools to be successful is a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, so let's switch, thinking about training effectiveness overall and getting a little granular with your experience. Um, let's talk about what you guys are currently doing. Like, how do you, after you build all the guides and kind of build out the ecosystem, you got that all running, just super specific into different modalities? How do you guys currently approach training to your employees around this stuff?
Yeah, it varies by role, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But for us, we're a global organization. We're training people across multiple time zones, and so you will have a new hire class that has 2 or 3 folks in North America, 2 or 3 folks over in Europe, potentially somebody in APAC that's working a second shift or a third shift, And that becomes very difficult in a remote world to keep everybody engaged. So for us, and where we're rebuilding our programs right now, but where we're going is a true blend, right? Blended learning, it works for a reason, right? That's not something that's new for us, but giving people not only instructor knowledge, giving them the resources through e-learning and documentation to read, but group thinking, right? Hey, let's solve some cases together. Let's work on this problem and come up with some solutions. So we do a lot. We do a lot of real case troubleshooting, examples that we put off in the training environment. So that's where we're going. Where we want to be in the future, though, so often organizations do all their training and then they hand the employee to the manager and say they're ready to go. In reality, they're not ready to go. So where we're going and what we want to solve is this transition period, right? You went from training. Before we hand you to your manager, we're going to put you in, I always call it nesting, right? Where you're going to have ramped metrics. You're going to have ramped expectations. You're going to work with a subject matter expert who you can run all of your cases or your questions by. So you're getting to use what you just learned before you're held to the same standard as everybody else, before you're turned loose and you've got 30 calls coming in an hour in our world, right? You actually get to go practice what you learned.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, so many things we get wrong across business are we think that the event is all you need, right? Like whether you have a robust onboarding program and it's months long or a week long or a day long, whatever it is, that's fascinating. Whether it's a mentor, kind of like the practice period before you actually start to do the job. I feel like a lot of organizations miss out on that.
Well, you and I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, right? Executive buy-in and getting organizations that are high functioning. So many times in my career, and I think in every L&D professional's career, anytime there's a problem, they go, "Oh, well, this has got to be a training issue. Oh, well, training didn't cover this. Well, let's talk to training. Can you do this next week? Can you go train everybody on how to do this so we never make this mistake again?" That's not ever going to work, right?
Yeah.
And half the time, training covers everything, but as humans, we can't retain that information, right? And so you have to give people the opportunity to practice what they learned with different expectations. I'm not saying that they can underperform, but you got to ramp those expectations for them. And if you don't have a program in place that does that, the employee does not feel supported. And they might not get to the end state as quickly as you want because they're out there floundering a little bit.
Yeah. Hey, this is a perfect time for a quick break to hear a word from our sponsor, BizLibrary.
At BizLibrary, we know that employee development and retention have never been more critical to your business. We help you build learning programs that create safe and inclusive work environments, elevate employee skills, and develop leaders who drive results. So now, you can take award-winning BizLibrary content and put it to work to help overcome your biggest challenges. BizLibrary, where learning happens.
Awesome. So, Brent, you just made me realize that part of the reason that I love doing these interviews is that being a marketing person, I think it's very cathartic to talk to L&D folks because we're both really in the same boat, right? When you're in these support functions, not that you always get blamed for things, but it's easy when you can't always measure the ROI. I'll say on the marketing side, right? Branding initiatives, product enablement, very similar to some of the things you've talked about. When it's hard to measure, did it work and how impactful was that? It's an easy scapegoat, right? And so with that, I'm kind of curious in your experience, where have you seen successful measurement of something like an onboarding program where you could point back as the L&D person and say like, hey, this is working. We need to keep this program running.
Yeah. If I think back to when I worked for an organization called Bullhorn, which sells an applicant tracking system for, the temporary staffing industry is really where they focus their industry, and they're a world-class leader in that space. And what we did with our onboarding there that was really effective was two-way evaluations throughout training. So at the end of each week, you as a learner actually got to rate yourself on a scale. How did I feel about this week? Not just how did your trainer do? Because everybody loves their trainers. Trainers
Yeah.
had fun. They handed out candy, whatever it was, right?
You feel for them
Everybody,
that they just spent 5 days with you too. And the
correct.
other, like the annoying person in the back that had questions you hated the whole time.
Correct. But at the same time, so we do a sentiment survey, right? So, man, I actually feel good. I feel confident that I could go find answers. I feel confident that I could apply this in the real world. At the same time, the trainer is filling out a very similar evaluation on that participant. So if it's a 4-week training program, we have 4 of these. The trainer each week then says, Paul, as my participant, is doing really well. Paul seems to be grasping the concepts and able to find answers. Paul is, going to be successful when he transitions to the floor. Now, in week 1, those scores should be lower.
Yep.
What we want to see is the sentiment score from the employee and the trainer evaluation move up week after week after week. Where red flags come up and allow you to have an intervention or some additional conversations with that employee is when the employee feels really disconnected. They feel like they're struggling, right? I'm not rating myself very high. That's a conversation. But the other thing is when they rate themselves really high and the trainer rates them really low, there's a huge disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And so that allows us to measure the effectiveness of the training in real time at an individual level. But then it also allows us to look for trends over time. Which week did we have participants really struggling, right? What do we need to do for that week? The content we covered, the examples we used to make this more relevant. So that's been a really effective way to measure how good the training is in real time. Long term, you have to look at the overall just productivity trends, right? Now, that's going to be different for certain job roles that might not have metrics. You might have a more of a soft skills a need that you need to train. But when you are, in sales or when you're closing cases or when you're working with customers, what are you seeing? What's their productivity like? What are the scores that the customers are giving them? And you just got to ramp those metrics to over an appropriate time frame to get them to where they need to be.
I was going to say, but before and after implementing a big program, pretty clear, right? You started the program for a reason. Did bugs go down? Did NPS scores go up? Did number of cases go? All these things that kind of speak to aptitude of what you learned when you started,
Right.
Which is great. I also really resonates with me the importance of survey design. I come from a world of a company that literally built out the largest, longest surveys you've ever seen for some of the world's largest automakers. And I think we've gone away from you're answering 100 plus questions in a survey, but the importance of survey design all comes back to, I think it's very common in L&D to be like, we just want to know if they liked it. Like, did you
Yeah.
it almost is like, you don't realize that you're not actually trying to measure business outcome. You're actually just trying to measure, like, do they like what you're putting together? And I love both in a product we have called BizSkills and Biz Academy, we have something similar, right? You rate yourself, but then your manager rates you on proficiency and skills. But we also, on the leadership side, we put these our clients through like 4 or 16-week academies. And exactly what you said at the start, what is your proficiency or your confidence level in these key skills you're going to learn over the next month or 4 months? And then let's see how that changes over time. And people will be honest about that, and it'll be based on what they learned. And then you can also check in with the manager and kind of see, like, is their aptitude grown based on the lessons?
Yeah, that's where we also saw a huge success from that is exactly what you just said is it's that transition to the manager, right? So you're leaving training. We've been keeping a score on you for 4 weeks, a weekly score. And by the way, the trainer can put in some notes too. I'm a manager. I'm getting you out of training and I can see this. Oh my gosh, we need to focus on this skill, right? They really seem to struggle with that. Now I know what the first couple of weeks are going to be as this employee has joined my team, where I need to focus my time. And I'm not assuming training taught this person everything they need to know to be successful, because that's just not the reality of what L&D can do.
Correct. Yeah, and I would imagine there's a lot of, again, like we talked about earlier, organizations that are awesome at the training part, that successful transition into management and the personalized development plan for that individual is where it falls off, which is so frustrating because that's really where the hard work begins.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. In those organizations, there's a lot of organizations will throw a ton of money at training, but you don't have necessarily the leadership buy-in. And then there's other ones that will have all the leadership buy-in in the world, but will give you zero resources. And you're building training in, Microsoft Word docs that you're sharing with everybody. Um, there's a middle ground that most organizations struggle to get to.
100%. Yeah. So, hey, not a whole lot of time left. So, couple, I want to really touch on with your really vast experience across the whole kind of life cycle of L&D and HR and organizations that all kind of had different mixes. You touched on that ecosystem, the importance of that in an organization across these functions. What's from your experience? What's working well across L&D and HR, and kind of what's still broken and outdated in the current model?
Every organization, right? So I talk about the ecosystem within my kind of world, technical training, right? You've got your content, your documentation. Where that ecosystem needs to get to is, how is HR part of that? And for many organizations, it still feels like onboarding is a little disjointed. You join the organization, you have your HR compliance training that you have to do on days 1 and 2 so that they are compliant. And if they ever get audited, every employee signed this, right? And that doesn't feel like it's really part of the overall onboarding experience. It's almost like it's a task that we have to do. And so, if there is a way that we can embed those required things as truly part of that onboarding experience, to not feel like a task on day one that I'm just here to fill out paperwork, those are the organizations that get that customer or employee buy-in, not customer, employee buy-in from day one. The organizations that are disjointed, where you do all your HR training for a couple of days, and then you do role training for a couple of days, and then you do something else for a couple of days, those are the ones that are going to struggle to get the employees to be excited about joining a new job.
Yeah, the organizations where the clients that we love versus the clients we work with, but we know they struggle. When they come to us for just annual compliance, yeah, absolutely, we've got that. We can help you. But when it's not, when they don't view onboarding as the very first opportunity to build culture and to connect someone to the brand, you're already in trouble, right? Exactly,
Sure.
kind of how you're describing it. It's interesting looking forward to 24. What we're seeing in trends in the workforce, right? And the expectation of Gen Z, which is like, I did a survey or a trend session recently where I pulled all this data on what Gen Z expects. And, these are all the 25-year-olds are just entering the business world for the first time. They've only known remote first, right? And by and large, and by 2030, they're going to be 30% of the workforce. And one of the things that it said they wanted from the survey was they want an onboarding experience that hits different. And I was like, that's super cool. Like, I don't even know what that means, but I know I want it. And I
I'm on
totally
board.
get why they want that, right?
Yes. Yes. So one of the first things I ever learned when I became a trainer, I went through a facilitation skills course, and my first, mentor, Brenda, she talked about beginnings and endings. And we as L&D professionals get so excited about employees joining our organization, and we are cheerleaders, like, rah, rah, you've joined a great organization, we're going to the moon, right? And we always forget why they joined our organization. And we assume it's because we put a great job in front of them at a great company that offers great benefits. We never take the time, nor do we need to fully ask these questions, but there's a reason they left their last place. They
Yep.
could have been laid off. They could have been fired. They could have had a sick family member, a million different things. And so while we're over here saying, go, 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 there could still be some trepidation in their mind. There could still be some concerns about this organization. And so that onboarding experience does need to wow them, but it also needs to go at a pace that's not, hey, we're going to onboard you in 3 days and then go expect you to do your job. Has to be consumable, has to be motivating, but you got to build the whole thing. And frankly, it starts before onboarding. After you've accepted that offer to the day you start, what's happening in there? Right? What are we doing to generate some excitement and get you what's coming?
Yeah. I'd add, we do a week-long deep dive called BizLibrary Bootcamp, and part of it heavily culture focused, right? You learn about every department, but that's the important part. Like, we talk about hiring smart, driven, caring, and curious people. So that whole first week, you are finding out the people that are in your training class, why they are smart, driven, caring, and curious.
Yeah.
You're excited because you're like, wow, I fit into this culture. And then you're meeting a whole bunch of people from around the company that have similar values to what the company believes. And it to a person, they come out of that like, oh my God, I've never experienced anything like this. And hey, guess what? You're a brand advocate 5 days in.
Yeah. What I would challenge you all to think about, and other people though, is that can become overwhelming and information overload in week one. You should continue to do it because it's the right thing. But how do you bring some of that back 60 days into the job, 120 days into the job,
Yeah.
just to remind you what this other group does, right? And it can't just be a portal where I go self-read and look at it. Like there needs to be a continuation of that, because buying into the culture takes more than just your onboarding experience, right? It can last 6 months, even a year. Your first year, there's so much. So how do you actually extend that?
I love that. I think it's absolutely a smart call and a challenge. The other thing I have not seen done extremely well in organizations is you learn all about the company and you learn it through PowerPoint slides and you learn it through someone talking at you about it. As best as is possible within the product that you sell, how are you giving new hires the experience of what your brand does, how it helps? Heck, I never, just a random thought, like bring customers into onboardings talking about why they love BizLibrary, right? Or through case studies and videos and getting them in. And I think about what you guys do, like how do they experience what the product is so that they're passionate on day one about that and understand how they fit in the bigger picture?
That is a huge opportunity. I think that is missing in most L&D spaces. I would 100% agree with you, right? So my first job out of college was a banker. I was selling checking accounts and credit cards. Okay, I know how a checking account works, so I know the questions my customers are going to have because I've had a checking account since I was, 18 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Now we're selling really sophisticated call center technology. And I've never worked in a call center. I've also never been an engineer in a call center. So part of that onboarding experience should be, you're going to go use this as a customer, right? We're going to show you how our customers use it, because frankly, when they have a problem and they call you, you don't know how it's supposed to work. So they're describing a
100%.
problem to you and you don't know what it's supposed to do. And so I think onboarding programs really need to take a step back and look at that. You're 100% right there.
Well, it's interesting that thought. Your example, I've never worked in a call center. You have no preconceived bias about what a good and a bad customer experience is because you haven't done it. That, who should we be asking for feedback on our products? The people who have never seen it before and are experiencing it for the first time with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
Really cool opportunity there for like product improvement feedback on day one. Now, a little bit of it's like, well, they're brand new, they don't want to share too much, but you could create a really open environment there right off the bat for frequent focus group feedback.
Well, yeah, sometimes the people that, you know, don't know how it's supposed to work also have the most transparent questions. Like, I would just expect it to do this. Why doesn't it do that? And you're like, we should have put the button on the left side versus the right side. Like, obviously, that's where it should go. Come from that perspective. We also, one of our core values at Genesis is really being empathetic and treating customer experiences with empathy. And so often in customer service roles, you think about the person you're interacting with. I'm going to be empathetic to them. I'm going to be as nice to them on the phone as I can to help solve their problem. But empathy has to extend beyond them, because actually, who are they trying to help and what's going on there, right? And sometimes we forget about that in customer service roles, that you're actually helping a bigger audience than just the one person you're talking to. And so the empathy has to extend beyond that conversation.
I love that. Yeah, what do they actually care about? Why are they here? It's a
Right.
whole other. Yeah, that's really really interesting. And going back to the last thought, you made me realize like this is not easy, but that example we just talked about, I think something that is such an underrated skill set. And I'll use marketing as an example because we're similar kind of support functions. I tell my team all the time, stakeholdering, your ability to make connections with other departments is huge, right? So it's a communication piece, but what you and I are talking about, how cool would it be for an L&D team, a really strategic leader, to be able to say like, hey, I think we could capture feedback that would actually inform product, talk to the head of product development, like your ability to make those connections and relationships, but also like eliminate double work and something that you could kind of get two outcomes from one job. It's kind of interesting concept.
Yeah, for sure. I think product feedback loops, um, talk to customers, we do focus groups, but there are also within every organization, there's so many internal users that have feedback, and from conversations I have with customers that maybe we're not capturing, for sure.
Hey, so I will close out with one kind of final question for you. So this YouTube series is called L&D Unlocked. Really, we are on a mission to try to understand what are the keys to unlocking successful L&D programs. Just to close out, what are three kind of top keys from your experience that successful L&D programs have?
Yeah, I think the first one we've covered already is that it does have to be an ecosystem, right? Your training programs have to utilize the resources that exist so your team knows where to go get answers. They're not going to remember everything you train them. So how do those work together, right? It has to be resource based. The second thing is embrace the changing technology that's happening. It doesn't mean you need to go gung ho into every single thing that's out there, but don't be afraid to explore some of the new video creation software that's out there, some of the AI stuff that's coming. That's going to allow you to iterate on your training programs at a much faster pace than you have. It's not going to replace trainers. It's not going to replace curriculum developers. It's just going to make it so we can stay up to date with all the changes that are happening in our product at a much faster pace because we can create training faster. And I think the third thing is when you talk about leadership buy-in, we oftentimes focus on executive leadership buy-in, and successful L&D programs, the buy-in actually starts with your frontline managers because they are the ones that really are developing your employees on an everyday basis. They need to understand what training is doing, what training is trying to accomplish, so that they can elevate the employee experience, they can coach the employees, they can work with them to develop their career, find opportunities and gaps in their skills. So if you're looking to build relationships, those frontline managers are key to the success of your L&D program.
I love that one. I think it's such a good point, especially when you look at when you have thoughts in L&D and you want to take those to the C-suite, like to your point, like, yeah, you got to manage up. What is the best source of pain in every organization right now? Is, do I have the right talent? It's new manager development because all the things that came out of the Great Resignation and COVID. So all of the most core things keeping C-suite up at night and biggest business challenges, if you've got a window into the psyche and the feedback and the thoughts of the frontline management team and can distill that into general trends and thoughts that you can take to the C-suite, my gosh, you're doing their job for them. Honestly, in a way, sometimes that you could be more connected and more of an ally than even members of the C-suite who just may be too busy to truly be as clued in to some of those trends as you.
Yeah, I won't name the organization that I worked for when I heard this line, and I heard it a couple times, but people would leave training and they would go to their respective teams and they'd be like, great, now let us teach you how we really do it. What a disconnect that is, right? And that's my point. You have to be ingrained with those frontline managers. If they're teaching them to do something different, I want to know why. What are we missing in training? There could be policy violations. It's a different conversation, but also maybe there's a more efficient way to do something that we don't know. And if we're not getting that feedback, our programs are out of date. Then there's not a partnership. Then there's not an agreement. So when we do have a new training initiative, they're not going to be bought in. Well, training's going to teach me one thing, but it's not the real way.
Well, it's such a shame too, because if you could have just had a seat at that table, nobody wants to just do work, right? Like,
Correct.
No, tell me what you want. I would love to rebuild this thing, right? I'm doing my best.
Correct. And if you found a different way to do it, how can we teach other people to do it that way then too, right? Yeah. So that relationship, I think, is an undervalued one that we need to invest more time in.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Brent, thank you so much for your time today. This was an absolutely awesome dialogue on all the things relative to L&D in the HR world. And hey, for those of you who want to subscribe and enjoyed this series, you can do that at bizlibrary.com or head to YouTube and look up BizLibrary and subscribe there. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
This episode has been brought to you by BizLibrary. Head to bizlibrary.com for more information.